Okay, a lot of you know Denny because of all his work that he does here, but let me give you some background you may not know about. Denny is from Minnesota, and you can ask him to present the Minnesota accent if you'd like. He got his undergraduate degree in Minnesota and a master's degree at the University of Minnesota, and he studied a number of things. Let's see. Common loons, beavers, snowshoe hares, and the like. He spent a lot of time in Boundary Waters canoe area, so he knows Minnesota, northern Minnesota, really well, and eventually made his way out to the western United States. Perhaps, and right here in the Affiliated Post, you will see the number of alter egos that we have heard about from Denny. And these are really something. And I think they tell us a little bit something about his personality. For example, I'll give you the names of his alter egos. Critter Man, that's Critter Man. Wolf Man, the Grizz, and my favorite, Dr. Death. Professor Avian Brano, and he's used that one a number of times around here. Dr. Lunacy, now there you go. That does represent you, Denny. Very good. The Lost Voyager, the Man Herbalist, and I expect he may have come up with one or two along the way. And so he's going to tell us a little bit about why it's not a bad thing to be called a bird brain. So Denny, why don't you come up and talk to us a little bit? The article in the Affiliated Post, you will see a lot more information about Denny. I'm not going to take time here to do it, but he's been a very influential person in wildlife, ornithology, and conservation. So, Denny, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you. You have to live a long time. That's the only thing. Yeah, and hi everybody. I'm usually up here doing a bird brain kind of a thing where I'm whistling bird songs and trying to give you a quiz or synonyms for bird names and things like that. But today, I'm going to get serious. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual bird brains. People have called me that lots and lots of times. I always do it as a compliment and say, bring it. It's okay with me. And I want to talk to you a little bit about a comparative thing between our brains and bird brains, which is a tough comparison because it's a different frame of reference. So with that in mind, are we ready over here? Okay. The names that it's not working.
I tried the other button. Try again.
Okay. That's backwards. Down is forward.
Down is forward.
Oh, down is forward. Okay. How about this? This is what it should be showing. So you've heard the names for birds, have you not? Bird brain and cuckoo and dodo and louie and booby and smew and silly goose. All these things are sort of pejorative names about birds' thinking ability. Well, I'm going to try to change your minds tonight, because birds are smart, in my opinion. Although, when you look at a spruce grouse, and I've been on the trail in Glacier National Park with Rhodes Scholars and Glacier Institute people, and especially in the Tunet area, in Many Glacier on the trail, and I've had this happen twice, where a male spruce grouse was chasing a female in the middle or late summer, when the female had half-grown chicks, and obviously the mating season it was well over for months, but the male was still pretty amorous and chasing her and the chicks. And she was trying to shed herself of this guy, because it was basically just, no, it's not the right time of the year, baby. And so she actually came through my legs with the chicks and walked out the other side and tried to shed him that way. He followed and went right between my legs too. And that happened to me twice in some of the hikes in Glacier National Park. So the name fool hen is an apt kind of a thing because they are pretty tame when it comes to human beings. And, you know, birds get a bad name. I mean, they're like, oh, flying reptiles, right? That's what people think. Well, let's talk a little bit about, if this thing, I can get this thing to work. Oh, yeah, the kind of thing that was they fly into windows. How bright do you have to be to do that, right? I mean, who would fly into a window? I just don't get it. Well, maybe once in a while we're guilty of some of those things ourselves. So what is smart? Bird smart is different than our smart. So, I mean, first of all, we judge things on the basis of our Stanford Binet IQ test or MMPI or some other thing that you can, some of the tests you can give people, and they measure certain things that determine whether or not you're intelligent, right? To a bird, it's pretty meaningless because they have a different kind of smart than we do. What is bird smart? It's a different frame of reference. Let's put it that way. They have tiny, tiny brains. Maybe, you know, I mean, obviously you would think that a bird has a very small brain. I think an example is here. Calliope hummingbird has a brain that is 1/5 of an ounce. Actually, the bird is 1/5 of an ounce, I'm sorry. And the bird brain is, if I can get this thing to go, is 1/80th of an ounce, which is pretty small. That basically is the same weight as what's that?
I saw the red on the floor.
Well, that's not the red.
I advanced it for you.
Okay, that was one more, back one. Third of a paperclip. That's the weight of a brain of Calliope hummingbird. Tiny brains, but they have to have small brains. Why? Yeah, because they're really small and they have to fly. They have to have lightweight. Don't you really? And so they have to have small brains. Maybe a better way of measuring that would be to talk about the relative weight of the brain compared to the body of the critter. Like, for instance, here's actually one of the most, this is one of the relatives. This reptile, T-Rex, is probably the closest relative to the birds that we have in the dinosaurs because they all started around the same time. Birds actually started at the beginning of the dinosaur era. Look at those wings. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? It's a close relative of a bird, but it really is a close relative of a bird. These guys have, a T-Rex have 13,700 pounds of meat on them. They are big, and they were big, and they were really heavy. But their brain size is 7 ounces. So when you do the comparative relative size of the brain for a T-Rex, we're talking about, if this thing can work, relative size, 1/31,000th of the body weight is their brain. Kind of a pea brain on a relative scale. And the blue whale. Blue whales weigh nearly 500,000 pounds. They're huge, huge, huge. Their brain is 20 pounds, which is a pretty big brain. But when you look at the relative scale, the relative size is 1/20,000th of their weight. Okay, you with me so far? So on a relative scale, here we have a bird. And this is an ostrich. Ostriches weigh about 270 pounds, and they have a brain of about 1.5 ounces, which gives you a relative size of 1/2900th. So we're getting closer and closer to being pretty good sized brains, are we not? Well, then you skip from there to another creature. And this one has a fairly good sized brain, at least according to what most people think. And this creature has averages around 150 pounds. And it has a brain of about 3 pounds. a little bit over 3 pounds. That's pretty big brain for something that's 150 pounds. The relative scale is 1/46th of the weight of a human being is their brain. Now that's smart, is it not? I mean, that's smart, of course. Of course, when you go a little farther along and you get to the rufous hummingbird, which is 1/4 of an ounce in size. You can mail 4 of them with 1 stamp. Okay. They have a brain of 1/100th of an ounce. It's tiny. But relatively speaking, 1/24th of their body weight is that they're about, so by this scale, they should be about twice as smart as human beings. You with me so far? Yeah, so brain size probably isn't going to work even on a relative scale. But you guys all know that the real mark of being an intelligent creature is to have perhaps be able to have fun and play, right? Do whimsical kinds of, to be whimsical, to have a sense of humor, right? Because that's pretty sophisticated thinking. And so you wouldn't expect birds to have that going on for sure. Would you? I mean, everything that they do is because they have to be tuned into tuned into survival and adaptive situations where they're adapting to fit their. So everything has to have survival value, and most people think that everything that most of the other animal kingdom does is because of their survival value. But we have a critter that is lives around here, called ptarmigan, well, a white-tailed ptarmigan in this case. White-tailed ptarmigans do these kinds of things. They dive down into the snow at night in the alpine. They live in one of the most awful kinds of environments that there is in the world. I mean, they're at high elevations that's below zero most of the time up at the alpine. And they live in a tough place. So you would think that they have to do everything that they have to do would be about survival. They eat willow buds all day long, fill up their crop. And then when the crop is finally full toward the end of the day, they don't really have to, they don't have to fill their crop anymore. So they're ready to go to sleep. Well, they don't go to sleep most of the time. A lot of times they find a hill and they will run over to that hill and they will cackle up to the top of the hill, and then they slide down like an otter, and they, cackling all the way, run back up the hill, slide down like an otter again, run back up the hill, slide down like an otter. That's what they do because they've got leisure time, and they are able to be whimsical. One of the other interesting things about these guys, you probably need to know this, is that they did a study on roosting ptarmigans, white-tailed ptarmigans. And when they dive into the snow, their crop is so full, it looks huge on them. They dive into the snow with all these little ones. They go down to the bottom so a fox couldn't, and then they move a little ways, they burrow a little ways through the snow so the fox couldn't just jump on that hole and catch them. They go to sleep, they wake up, and they poop. Though, of course, they don't want to sleep there anymore, right? So they move a little ways farther under the snow, and they go to sleep, then they wake up, and then they poop. Then they move a little bit farther, and they go to sleep, and they wake up, and they poop, and they move a little 45 times per night. We thought we had it bad at our age. I mean, come on. This is, I mean, they do a lot of pooping. But anyway, they do also know how to have some fun. And ravens like to play catch with snowballs. And sometimes they have a snowball fight where they throw it at each other. Survival behavior, right? I don't think so. And then some ravens like to fly. I had a raven that I watched one time when I was elk hunting. I was up on top of the tall hill looking down over the low spot. And a raven flew upside down for about 1/4 of a mile, cackling to his buddies, upside down for about 1/4 of a mile. It's like, hold my beer, watch this. and there's absolutely no reason to do that other than the fact that they were whimsical and having a sense of humor. So what I'm saying here is that they have a different frame of reference than we do about what is smart and what isn't smart. If this thing can work again. You must be doing it by hand, right?
Nope, you were shooting me with a laser.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, the laser was low. Yeah, okay. Where are we? Okay, there we are. So let's talk about bird smart. This is one of my favorites for bird smart. What do you know about chickadees? They're half an ounce. They're really tiny. Black-capped chickadees are tiny. They have they run around and cache food, maybe to the tune of 1,000 pieces of food or 2,000 pieces of food during the winter, during the fall, so that they can eat this stuff during the winter time. And they remember where they all are. Okay. And the other things that they do, they hibernate every night. Their body temperature is about 105, and they drop that body temperature down to as low as 88 every single night when they jump into a hole and go to sleep. So they hibernate every night, and it actually saves them about 20% of the energy that they would need in the wintertime. They have to eat about, in a below zero day, a chickadee will probably have to eat nearly 3 times its weight in food that day. So if they weigh 1/2 ounce, they would have to eat 1.5 ounces of food just to stay alive. And that puts a lot of pressure on them, as you might well imagine. They also have 16 plus different calls and songs. Now, you all know the one that they're doing this time of year, right? That's the cheeseburger song, and that's the mating song, but they do about 16 other, at least 16, some people think as many as 21 different kinds of calls that have different kinds of meaning. So they have a language. And they also do a snake act. When they're nesting and the female is on the eggs and somebody comes up to the nest hole and sticks their eye up to it, somehow I know what happens, because I did it. And I stuck my eye up to the hole, and something inside went, tried to strike me. It was like a snake trying to strike me on the inside of the hole. And I went backed up like this. First I went potty, then I jumped on the tree. It was a very, very good imitation of a snake. And you know, obviously it takes a little bit of intelligence to come up with that kind of a snake act. And the interesting thing about chickadees is that the farther north they live, the bigger their brain is for gathering food and for finding food in the wintertime that they've catched. So, and that also is true of elevation. If they're at higher elevations, their brain is bigger. I'd love to be able to do that. And then there's the relative mountain chickadee, that little guy with the little white stripe above the eye. In the black cap. And the mountain chickadee lives in the mountains, but I've got nesting pair at my house right now that are beating up on any other mountain chickadees that show up. And the mountain chickadees have this thing called neurogenesis. When the winter starts coming, something happens in their brains that grow them by 30%. Especially the hippocampus area of the brain. I'm not going to bore you with the details of the pallium and the hyperpallium and the palladium and all those different kinds of brain names, because the neurologists can do that sort of thing. But the hippocampus is easy to remember, because just remember that when a hippopotamus goes to college, they live on the hippocampus, okay? That's the easiest way to remember that. And the neurogenesis reverses itself in the springtime when they don't need all of that brain activity to be able to survive in the wintertime. So I'd love to be able to grow my brain for about 30%, say when I'm going to program for Audubon, for instance. But it doesn't work that way. This little guy is really tiny, 1/3 of an ounce. In this group, the golden crown kinglet, they're here now. And if it's 30 below, they're here. This guy has to eat probably every 2 hours or it dies. It can't go more than 2 hours without food. That's how high their metabolism is. Tiny little bird. They have up to 8 or 9 chicks in the springtime, And once she's done with the chicks fledging, the chicks start flying, she leaves and lays another batch of nine. And the male stays with the fledgers and feeds the fledgers. That's a busy boy, feeding all of those little guys at the same time. They have to have a high reproductive rate because I suspect that their mortality rate is also pretty high considering where they live in winter and what size they are. They nest, they roost together. They will do a certain kind of a call. Actually, you want me to do a chickadee call or a kinglet call? Okay, it sounds like this. This is what it sounds like to me. Did you hear that? That's what it sounds like to me because it's too high for me to hear it. It's very high. But there's a certain style that they do that gather together. They gather together and they stuff themselves on a branch in a sheltered area and they pack together and puff their feathers up like little puffballs, tuck their heads under their wings. And so like 4, 5, or 6 of them will be in a row stuffed together. And that's how they get through the night. They don't even find cavities like the chickadees do. And that's how they survive. But the interesting thing the most interesting thing, they're 111 degrees. That's their body temperature. The contrast between that and 30 below is insane. I mean, it's insane. And they have a very relative brain size of 1/14, which means this is the smartest one that I know of. And they eat mostly inchworms. You guys have seen the little tiny inchworms that hump up and walk along. They have to find those inchworms. I defy you to go outside into the woods and find one inchworm this time of the year. And that's what they eat in the wintertime, hibernating inchworms. And so they eat that. And the thing about needing the food that they need, because they have to have all this brain power going to find all those inchworms in who knows where places, they use about 65% of their metabolic energy to think. Their brains are high energy consumers, big time. And so that is kind of smart. So here we have brains. We have the human brain on the left side. And if you look over there, that little, the blue stuff is actually the neurons in a human brain. Now, neurons are cells that have long axons and a bunch of other names, but they have synapses between themselves. In order for something to fire, it has to go from this neuron to a few other neurons, but it has to do a chemical release to go across the gap. Does that make sense? That stuff is called, what's that?
Acetylcholine.
Yeah, acetylcholine, yes. Yeah, acetylcholine, yeah. And so, and dopamine sometimes too. And so what happens is the brain has to, so we have a lot of very heavily spaced areas in our brain. Look at the one on the right, the bird brain, how close those neurons are together. And there are more connections. And the synapses are smaller. And what that translates to is that the brains of birds pass electrical energy through neurons, thoughts in other words, 5 times as fast as human beings, 5 times as fast, which is pretty astounding. The modern view of bird brains, the two on the bottom, the bird brain is on the left and the human brain is on the right. The green areas of the classic view, this is what we used to think about bird brains. Purple is responsible for instinctive behavior, more primitive kinds of behaviors. And the green is responsible for complex cognitive kinds of things that they do. We have now gone full tilt the other direction and look at the green area in the bird brain with the modern view on the left side. How much green there is means that you're using higher order thinking a lot. And it much more resembles our brains than it does in the classic view. So they see and they hear the world at hyperspeed. People have taken chemicals, corticosteroids, stress hormones that cause you, when you get stressed, your hormones, adrenaline will just hit your system, and it has effects on you. Correct? This happens. Anybody under stress ever? Yeah, I kind of think you probably know what I'm talking about. They've injected chickadees with corticosteroids, stress hormones, and they found out that the chickadees who were injected with a tiny, tiny amount, because you have to be careful because they're small, can gather food twice as fast, and they can find the food that they stashed twice as fast. That chemical that gets released, the stress hormones, when winter starts putting stress on them, that's when it hits the hippocampus, because that's where it comes from, and the hippocampus starts to grow at 30%. Am I making sense here? Now, the hippocampus also is responsible for producing estrogen, which is the female hormone, right? We at least associated with females, we all have both, but women have much more estrogen than men do. And so what that suggests to me, the hippocampus is responsible for what we call temporal time and spatial area recognition. In other words, how to find stuff that you stored somehow, good memory for the layout and where things are. Does that make sense? At my house, I call that multitasking. And so I have an evidence-based, factual, scientific reason for not being able to multitask. and because I just don't have as much estrogen, which is what you need. Well, speaking of seeing the world at hyperspeed, these guys, these little calliope hummingbirds, they're tiny, tiny, tiny. And they are, their heart rate is 1,200. Their wing beats, they could go from 48 miles to a dead stop. From that side of the room to that side of the room would take them a second and a half. That's how fast they fly. And yet, have you ever seen one land? I want to know, because I haven't. I've seen them, I've seen where they go, and then all of a sudden they're on the branch, but I never saw them land because it's like, yeah, and they're stopped. So from 48 to 0 in a microsecond. And so their brains have to operate at tremendous speeds to be able to do these kinds of just coordination things. Does that make sense to you? I mean, they're really, really, really quick. 80 plus wing beats per second. And when they are looking for flower juice, you might recognize this. Do the same birds come back to your hummingbird feeders at a certain time of the day or within a certain rhythm? And do they know when you feed it? Do they learn when you actually put the food with the nectar out? They have been able to show that hummingbirds can remember different species of flowers, and they may have to deal with 30 or 40 species of flowers that they're getting nectar from, and they learn the refresh rates for the new nectar of each of those flowers, and remember that they only have to go back to the trillium once at this amount of time, but they have to go back to the cardinal flower a lot sooner because it refreshes. So they remember all of those different flowers and what their refresh rates are. Bird brains. And speaking of hyperspeed, murmurations. You guys know what they are, right? Have you ever watched film of these things on YouTube? It is pretty astounding to watch this. Sometimes 100,000 birds at one time flying around in unison. Now, what they have found out about this whole business of murmurations is that the only way that they could move that fast is they have to be hyper aware. Obviously, they've got the advantage of having that 5 times our speed neurally, right? And they're aware of the sides, the top and the bottom, behind them, in front of them, and then up at about a 45 like this. And they keep track of those 7 quadrants all the time. And if there's any movement, right, left, up, down, of those that are next to them, they automatically, at 5 times the speed of our neurons, will adjust to that. So what they do is they have this instant way of adjusting because of that hyperspeed that they have. And that's the only reason that they can fly around as a group. How can they turn as one? That's how they do it. And I don't know what happened there. Oh, and why do they move? Anybody know why they move? The way they move? There's a couple of reasons that are hypothesized. One is pretty clear. That would be this one. Peregrine falcon zeroing in on you, and the best way to make the peregrine falcon confused is to have 100,000 of you that move as one. And so when that happens, literally, it causes a lot of misses on the part of falcons and birds of prey. The other reason that they do it, they think, I don't know who they are, but they do, is to stay warm. Not in the air. They gather in the evening to do, most of these murmurations happen in the evening. When they gather in the evening and they find more and more birds, and they fly around together, they finally funnel down to a place as a group where they will be able to pack together and have shelter over the top of them, get the geothermal heat of the earth, and be able to stay warmer. Does that make sense? So that's one of the reasons that they do that. But the real question here is who starts it all? And sometimes they act like they're one organism, like a bird pecking at food on the ground. And then when it gets full, it starts to flap its wings. And then when it starts to fly, it flies to the north or the south. It's pretty amazing, some of the shapes that they make. Obviously, these are sort of random, well, maybe. I don't really know that. And so the real question is, who decides first? Who decides we're going to turn now and go this way, and we're going to make this shape and that shape? And that's a question that nobody has been able to answer. Nobody. Groupthink is something that birds can do way beyond our comprehensions, way beyond. We can act as a mob, but we're acting as individuals in the mob. What about applied mathematics? Applied mathematics is the only kind I can do because I like to measure things on a stick. But applied mathematics for birds, they like the dipper, for instance. You guys know what dipper is, right? American dipper. Why do they call it the dipper? Because it dips in the water? No, not really. Well, I think the name came from the fact that they get up on top of the rock and then they go like this, bouncing up and down. And the reason that they're bouncing up and down, which is hypothesized by mathematicians, is that they're looking down in the water at their prey, which are insects that are aquatic insects. So that's what they eat. This one's got a mouthful right now, probably headed back to the nest to feed babies. And when they look for those things, when you look at a fish off the end of the dock, is that fish where you see it? There's a refraction. No, it's not there. It's actually there. And so these guys will look at an insect down in the water from here, and then 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 they triangulate to where that insect really is, doing trigonometry to find the word. So these guys do optical trigonometry to find the prey, which is math. You can estimate distance based on that angle to the critter. That's the way you would do it with a surveyor's transit, for instance, which is a very precision piece of equipment. And then there's also this guy doing auditory trigonometry. They have these big facial discs. Their ears are crooked. One's high, one's low. One faces backward, one faces forward. The mouse out there will go make a sound. The sound comes to this ear slightly later than it comes to this ear, and their brain calculates that difference. So this ear says it's coming from there. This ear says it's coming from there. That facial disc is a big parabolic receiver. And so if there's a mouse under the snow that these guys hear 2 feet down under the snow, they can know exactly where it is by doing auditory triangulation, estimating distance, depth perception with their ears. Try it sometime. IQ test from the great gray owl. Okay, humans, sit 20 feet up in a tree, down, dive into 2 feet of snow, come out with a mouse every time. Who flunks? Yeah, so they can do things we can never dream of doing because of their bird brains. And this guy is a pretty quick one, right? Anybody know what it is? peregrine falcon with the cheek patches, right? And this is one in a 100-mile-an-hour kind of a position. But when they form that bullet shape, they can go up to, in a dive, they can go up to 240 miles per hour, which is just what's the fastest self-propelled thing on planet Earth is what it is. It's the fastest there is. And so these guys really fly fast, but they have a problem. The problem is this: they have eyes that are really weird. Their focal area, like when I look at you out in the audience, you guys from Flathead High, I look at you in the audience, I'm looking at you with the fovea, which is the focal point where all those cones are concentrated in the eye, you know, on the retina, on the back, on the big screen in the back. So when you look directly at someone, you can see at a distance if you're a human. These guys in that focal area can only see about 3 or 4 feet away. They use their focal area to feed their young and to do all the things around the nest and to probably be able to rip apart some prey or whatever else. But their focal is there. They only see clearly in a ring in their retina around the back of the retina, not in the center. Okay, so that translates to this. They're in a dive, and down a half a mile below them, they go in, they see a duck flying that they want to eat. So they look at the duck and they go straight at the duck and can't see it. It's gone because they're nearsighted in the focal area. So then they tilt their head like this, and they can only go about 100 miles an hour because they're not in that perfectly streamlined shape, and they never catch the duck. So they've got, what they do is I would call advanced calculus. What they do is they will actually look at that duck, look off to the side of the duck, up, down, side, whatever, and they will keep their head perfectly straight and head off in that direction, but their head perfectly straight, still keeping that duck focused in the clear part, the far-sighted part ring in their eye, and they spiral in to the duck at 200 miles an hour because they can maintain that shape with the body without tilting the head to the side. I would call that advanced calculus because you're dealing with parabolas and all sorts of sines and cosines and all sorts of other things. I mean, that is pretty fantastic stuff when you think about it, how they've adapted to that. How about language? Bird language. You think they have languages? I don't know. We don't speak their languages. I do. Some of you don't. But I don't know what they mean. So like the wood thrush, for instance, that's the guy who does this. I can't even do it. Something like throat is so dry, but like that, they do that trill at the end, right? That trill, if you slow it down to 1/4 speed, it's 4-part harmony. It's at the very least, it's a barbershop quartet on that trill. And they do about 45 different kinds of songs and trills, each bird, about 45 different kinds. Do they mean different things? We have no idea, but they could. They could very well mean very different things. And then there's the Pacific wren, who does a really fast trill, tiny little bird about this long. No. How can anything that tiny do something that long? Well, they can actually inhale and sing and exhale at the same time because of the way their syrinx is located. So they can sing continuously if they need to. And if you slow their song down, you can see that they sing 36 notes per second, which is pretty complex. So they see and hear the world at hyperspeed, and they talk fast. Imitation, the sincerest form of creativity. The mimics. This is a lazuli bunting. And the lazuli bunting is a beautiful bird that likes those nice north slopes or south slopes where there's brushy areas There's a great spot near Josephine Lake where I see them all the time in the park. They like brushy areas, and when they fledge, when a male fledges, it still doesn't have a song. It doesn't even try to develop a song. They all have, if you listen carefully, you will hear that it sounds like a lazuli bunting, but every single buddy around you that you can hear within earshot sounds a little different from the guy next door. A little different. And so these guys fly away, they go on migration to wherever they winter, come back in the spring, find an open place where they're not going to get a lot of competition, probably at the edge of the prime stuff, but they have to start somewhere because they're young, right? And so it's getting your first job, guys. So what happens is they find an area where they can set up a territory. They listen to all the other lazuli buntings around them and take a piece from George and a piece from Harry and a piece from Mortimer and a piece from Fred, and they put that together and make their own song. So they make that song from the songs of everybody else. And I think it has something to do with, I'm going to sound more like Fred when I'm next to Fred so he doesn't beat me up. And I'm going to sound more like Mortimer when I'm next to Mortimer so he doesn't beat me up. So you see what I'm getting at there. So the placating kind of a thing. Catbirds can mimic almost anything. When I'm out in the woods, when I'm down next to the stream or next to the lake and I'm in a bunch of alders or willows, catbirds will live there, but also black-headed grosbeaks live there. That's the long-winded robin. Right? On and on and on and on and on. And this guy does a perfect imitation of it. So you can't really, until you see that bird, you can't really tell. Except there's one dead giveaway. Every once in a while, this guy will go, he does that little buzz in the middle of it. And that's the only way to be able to tell the difference. I don't exactly know what mimicry is about. I got to be honest with you. I haven't read anything or found anything that I could read that talks about why it works for birds, but some of them are just exceptional at it, like the barn thrasher. Donald Cruz was the first guy to really study bird song a lot, and he hired his mom to take his sonograms of bird songs and put them in the pile. So he worked with the same thrasher for a long time, and every time he found a different song, she was supposed to put that in a different pile. And she ended up with a big empty room with 3,000 different piles of songs that he revisited every once in a while. 3,000 different songs. Were they all words? The vocabulary of the kindergartner for us is about that. About 3,000 songs, 3,000 words. So language, it's a mystery to us. This guy comes into my yard and does, instead of just flying in and beating up on everybody like you probably have seen blue jays do, because they're kind of a little bit bullyish around. I have a peck order that is, it goes like this. It goes dicky birds, the chickadees, mountain chickadees and black-capped chickadees are too quick. And so they just zip in and zip out and nobody bothers them. But the dicky birds like the house sparrows and house finches and the goldfinches, those guys are there. And when the starlings come in, they beat up on them and they shoo them away. And then the flickers come in and beat up on the starlings and shoo them away. And when the blue jay comes in, he doesn't just come in and start to beat up on somebody. He stays a ways away in the tree and he does a perfect Merlin call, which is a small bird eater, and everybody goes gone. And he flies down gently and sits and eats with peanuts and has himself a good, peaceful time by doing that. So there's obviously a reason for mimicry with these guys. They're very, very smart that way. And it has a relative, which is a magician. You guys have heard of a Western scrub jay? Western scrub jays bury food in a lot of places like a lot of these corvids do, especially the jays and the nutcrackers. We'll get to that. They bury seeds, berries, pieces of vegetation, meat, fat, all sorts of things in different places. But they have their caches are all over the place in the ground. They bury this stuff. Two things that they do though. They remember where the fat is and they go back to that one first because it spoils fastest. And then they remember where the meat is to go back to that one next is fast. So when they make their rounds in the winter, going back to these caches, they know which things are going to spoil faster than others, and they go back to those first. So they remember all of these hundreds, maybe thousands of places that they have food, what kind of food it was, so that they have, and when they have to go back to get it. That's called, what is it called? Episodic memory. Space and time combined together. And then the other thing that they do is they look over their shoulder a lot. Because if they see another scrub jay watching them bury a piece of food, they know what's going to happen because it takes a thief to know a thief, right? And so what they do is they will come back, they will bury it, go a little ways away, come back again when that bird leaves, and then bury it again in a different spot. So they know how they use that methodology to outwit the other birds. Some of them have geographic minds, finding their way. Migration is a major league thing with birds, and a high percentage of our birds migrate every year. You guys know this one, black swift in the park, very rare bird, probably 20,000 in the world that we know of, and that's the estimation. Partners in Flight thinks that since they go to the rainforest, that rainforest depletion and destruction is really making a big impact on them. They estimate that 94% of black swifts are now gone. So there's 6% left of the ones that were here in 1970 and before, in the last 50 years. It's a huge drop in the population. But they have this mind, the migrating mind, which is pretty illustrative of the birds that migrate. They have one chick, and that partly is one of the reasons they have one chick, and they also only nest behind waterfalls. And so those two things combined to make the reproductive rate really low. That one chick will sit there and get fed every evening just after dark. My mom and dad will come in and stuff them with cheeks full of insects that they've been flying around all day long. And then that's it. They get fed once a day. And they grow up and they grow up and they grow up and they finally get to the point where they're about like this guy. And then when they leave the nest, they don't come back. They don't like go out. A lot of the birds will fly out a little ways or stand on the end of the branches and flap their wings. These guys go off the nest, fly. And some people think that it's the first leg of their migration to the rainforest in Brazil. And we don't know whether they stop or not, because swifts don't have to stop. They're in the air a lot, and they don't have to stop. They eat insects, they swoop down to drink, or they drink rainwater as it's falling. They court in the air, they mate in the air, and we're starting to believe that they sleep in the air as well. Which is kind of a good trick because you don't have a co-pilot. But when you're sleeping in the air, most swifts, we think now, have the same skills as frigate birds and albatrosses and some of those birds that fly out over the open ocean for a long time. We think that they sleep with half of their brain, one hemisphere of their brain, and they're awake with the other operating. And then they switch off and sleep with the other half of the brain. So they never really have to go fully to sleep. They can only go half asleep using half of their brain. When I see that behavior in humans, it's pretty obvious. But these swifts are, I mean, they fly. Some of the common swifts in Europe have been known to, for at least, and some people think maybe more, fly and never land for 10 months. Never land at all. 10 months. That's a long time to be in the air. And obviously, you've got to sleep sometimes, so probably they're using that half of the brain kind of thing. There's actually some more examples of that. The frigate bird is the one that they've done some extensive research on to find out that that's exactly what they do. They use half their brain at a time. But you may not know this, but Bob, you were mentioning your mallards in the yard. When they go to sleep, they have this little third eyelid. You see that one that looks white? When they go to sleep, they have that third eyelid that closes. But they often only close the eyelid on the open water side when they're sleeping on the water. And the other side facing the land where a predator could come from is wide open. So they use half of their brain at a time. They sleep with half of their brain here, and what the other half is awake for predators. And that happens with a lot of waterfowl. A lot of waterfowl will do that. I'll keep an eye out for you, sort of thing, right? And so these guys do that half a brain kind of thing too. And one other thing about swifts, there's this phenomenon that swifts have that it's called vesper flight. Have you ever heard of that? In the common swifts in Europe will often, in the evening, they will gather in a group and start circling around each other, and they gain altitude and gain altitude and gain out until they're out of sight. They go beyond our ability to see them up in the air, really high. And they go up so high, and then we didn't know what they do until a few pilots were flying through some of these groups up in the upper atmosphere. And they were motionless. They looked like they were sleeping with both halves of their brain with their wings up, just soaring and getting the updrafts and circling around, totally motionless as pilots flying through. That is just really weird. And we think that they're sleeping maybe with both halves of their brain. It's called vesper flights because vesper prayers in some Christian religions are when in the evening prayers that you do on a regular basis and they ascend to the heavens. It's kind of a cool concept. And these guys have these vesper flights. Some scientists are now beginning to believe that what they do is they go to this critical layer in the upper atmosphere where they're going to get updrafts, but it's also a place where they're measuring temperature and measuring wind velocity and measuring humidity and doing all of those things that you would do as a weathercaster to determine what the insect hunting is going to be the next day. And they're looking way off to the prevailing west where the weather is going to come from. This is what kind of clouds you're seeing up there. Some people think what they're doing on the vesper flights is being weathercasters, which is bird brain stuff. GPS, global positioning systems. And when you combine global positioning systems, when you're on migration as a bird, with fuel efficiency, you get a migrator. And let me give you an example or two of that. This is the bar-tailed godwit. Bar-tailed godwits nest and reproduce in it's a shorebird in western Alaska. And in the fall, when they're ready to migrate, they fatten themselves up, gain about 50% of their weight in fat, and then they take off across the Atlantic. And they don't cross over any land, not Midway, not Hawaii, nowhere. It's a straight line shot. No one really knows exactly how they do this navigational wonder. But they go straight across the Atlantic, not stopping one time for 7,200 miles and land in New Zealand. Not landing one time. And the way birds migrate is a combination, which we know what we know of it. It's a combination of being able to have an internal clock that shows where the sun is. The clock says, oh, the sun came up here and my clock is saying now it's 10 o'clock. So the sun should be there. And if I want to go straight south, I should be going that way. And so they have this internal clock that measures the sun's arc and determines what way is they have to migrate, the direction they have to migrate based on the time of day of the sun. At night, they have constellations that they follow. So they're looking for the Southern Cross or something like that when they cross the equator. And so, and then they also, when things are foggy and rainy and everything is really really crummy weather for them, what they will do is they will take their magnetite in their hippocampus again. There's magnetite in there, magnetic mineral. There's magnetic minerals in their bill, up in the front of their bill, and magnetite there. There's also magnetite in the retinas of their eye. And the combination of the magnetism, being able to read magnetism from those three sources, it's like they can see magnetic lines of force. Like they can see it. That's like being able to see gravity. I can't do that. but they have some almost magical powers. This guy is half an ounce. Black polar warbler. Starts out in Western Alaska too, but flies straight east over to Newfoundland, non-stop, we think. So it fattens itself up, doubles its weight, goes from a half an ounce to a full ounce. So it's just a little tubby, and then it takes off and flies all that way, 2,000 miles from Western Alaska to Newfoundland, and then stops at the gas station. The prices have gone up again. And so they have to run around and get insects and all the high quality food, and they fatten themselves up again in about a week to the point where they've doubled their weight again. And then they take off out over the Atlantic, go out way out in the middle, all the way toward the equator. And once they get to a certain point and they can catch the westerlies, the trade westerlies, they will turn around and come all the way back on a 2,000-mile flight again over the ocean. They don't float, they can't swim. And they land in New Zealand, or not New Zealand, but in Venezuela and the Guyanas. That's 2,000 miles nonstop for a half ounce bird. I calculated what kind of mileage they get with their fat. And the mileage that they get amounts to if they double their weight and then they use a half an ounce of fat for 2,000 miles, it works out to about 500,000 miles per gallon of fat. So Priuses eat your heart out, and EVs eat your heart out for that matter. And so these guys, I mean, it's physiologically, those are absolutely, and that's bird smart. This is the kind of thing that happens when you get to practice. Playing the odds. That would mean what? It would mean innovative kind of behavior and being able to do guesswork, right? In Zimbabwe, which used to be called Rhodesia, I think. Was it Zimbabwe that used to be called Rhodesia? I can't remember. Anyway, there are vultures that sit on this fence post. There were at the time. They've cleaned it up since then. But there was an area that they fenced off where there were landmines. And there was cattle and gazelles that would be in there every once in a while and step in the wrong spot. And the vultures would be waiting on the sides for this to happen. So they waited, they figured out in a flash that their best strategy for survival was to wait on the fence post till somebody stepped on a landmine and then everybody gets to eat. So that's what they did. They figured stuff out. You know, it's like doing these calculations. And it's astounding stuff. The innovators, as you probably know, are things like green herons. Green herons will take a dragonfly or a little bug and gently lay it on the water, and then they stir it around a little bit to make it seem like it's moving with their beak in a gentle kind of way, and a little minnow comes up and it's gone. So they're fishing. I have over $1,000 worth of fishing equipment, and I don't have that kind of efficiency at all. I mean, they are, and that's how they eat. So they're doing trickery. And then there are the bean counters. You probably know about these guys. The one we know a lot about is the gray jay. 25,000 different pieces of food, insects, seeds, whatever, pieces of fat from a kill. They will paste these to the outside of the tree trunks in their territory, in their actually their home range, their feeding area, and then they will come back in the winter time to eat this stuff. That's what they eat. They eat the cached food. 25,000 different pieces of food per bird, and they remember nearly all of them. And the other interesting thing, anecdotal evidence, no studies so far, he loved the great PhD, anecdotal evidence that they can estimate what the coming snow level is at these high level areas is, and they will keep all of their food up above what the maximum snow level is going to be a few months from now. Farmer's Almanac, your heart. I mean, it's some of the stuff is just completely mystery. It's bird brain stuff. 33,000 different places for the Clark's nutcracker with white bark pine seeds. They bury them and they miss some of them. They don't have to come back to all. They probably bury more than they can use, and then the white bark pines get planted in the perfect spots. And so this relationship between those guys and white barks have been going on for a long time. Diana Tomback, who did this 1978 study from University of California, Santa Cruz. Diane Tomback, I got a chance to chat with her one day. She was up here at Kalispell for a meeting of the White Bark Pine Society. And she was the person who actually did the first quantification of how many seeds that they do. And she said, well, I don't tell everybody this, but I think, there was some problems keeping track of where the birds were going all the time. I think that some of them do as many as 85,000 different seeds in 35,000 different places, and they remember them. Those are the bean counters. Those guys have a memory like that. How can you even compare it to anything else? There's a bird IQ index done by a guy named Lefebvre. It's Lefebvre. It's kind of a French name that I can't pronunciate. He did a bird IQ index, and what it was about this innovation thing. Are they able to do creative things for finding food or for whatever else? Okay, but they're innovators. And the top of the list, according to him and the bird IQ did, as you guessed it, all of the corvids, like the ravens and the crows and the jays and the magpies and the nutcracker. Those are the smartest critters. Second down the list, believe it or not, were the falcons. They're pretty innovative themselves in terms of the way. And then below that were the woodpeckers. So when you see the pileated woodpecker out in the Saraway, you know you're looking at a kind of a smart guy. The bottom of the barrel was California quail. Not just the California quail, also the mountain. Most of the New World quails were thought of as the least innovative. That doesn't mean that they're not good at surviving, because they're here, but they're the least innovative of the birds that they found. So that, and for what it's worth, we came up with an index, and a lot of that has to do with extended thinking. Crows, if they have a nice morsel, like you see in this tube that's floating in the tube, they will take rocks, or they've done experiments where they take rocks or pieces, in this case, pieces of marble or something like that, drop them into the tube to raise the water level to get that food so they can reach it once the water level gets highest. And they figure out how to do that themselves. Japanese crows sit up next to stoplights. And they fly down and they put a walnut down on the ground, and the cars come up and run over the walnut at the stop sign. The stoplight turns green, the cars go, they fly down and grab a walnut meat and eat it. They learned how to do that. Some places in the United States, swallows have learned to fly around in circles in front of the electric eye at the Home Depot till the doors open up. And then they go inside and they nest on the pipes up above in the front porch. And every time that the door opens, they can go out. And if they need to come back in, they fly around in front of the electric eye and come back in again. And of course, when they close at night, they're sleeping anyway, so it doesn't matter. So they learn how to use that ability to nest in the Home Depot's porch. You can't make this stuff up. You just can't. I mean, they are just astounding. There was a study around 2010, I think, that somebody did in Seattle, where they trapped and they used everybody who was on the team wore a Richard Nixon mask, That's probably because that's the ones that they could find that were left over from the Halloween. And they put them in Richard Nixon masks, and they trapped them and banded them and stressed the heck out of the crows in the area. And so they banded a bunch of crows, which is a traumatic experience for anybody. Somebody grabbed me and they stuck me and banded me out, and they wouldn't be too happy about it either. But they all were wearing Richard Nixon masks, and anytime anybody wore a Richard Nixon mask around there, they got mobbed and screamed at by the crows. And it was just because they recognized that particular face. They tried other masks like a Neanderthal and all sorts of other things like that, no reaction. But as soon as Richard showed up, they were all over it. They repeated that one in 2012 with the Dick Cheney masks. And it was just because that's probably what was around again. And they did the same thing, but they found out with that one, which is a longer term study, that the crows passed on their hatred of Richard Cheney all generation after generation after generation. Sounds like politics in America, doesn't it? and so that what they proved, or so what they showed at that point in time, is that it goes from generation to generation to generation. I think that this is kind of unfair because this is on the Republican side of the whole thing. So I would submit that the next test ought to be done in a different kind of a way, just to make sure that we aren't looking at some sort of political prejudice on the part of the crows. Okay, and then I would further suggest that crows, see if crows can really distinguish things beyond just the facial recognition. Like, for instance, the difference between stable geniuses. To see if the road crows can recognize that. Hey, magpies are interesting because how many people have run across somebody who hates magpies? I have run across lots of people that just hate magpies. And I really don't know why. They're beautiful birds. They can be pesky. But I think some of it has to do with grandpa hated magpies, dad hated magpies. By God, I hate magpies too. I really do think that there's a generational kind of thing going on there. And magpies, maybe part of the problem is that magpies are brilliant. And they shame us. Let me give you some examples. When the magpie sees itself in a mirror, and you put like a spot on its, you capture a magpie and put a spot on its chest, it looks in the mirror and it instantly goes down and kind of works on that spot. It knows who's in the mirror. And it's self-aware. It knows that mirror is me. That's me right there. So that is one smart thing that they do. Another smart thing that they do is, when they find a kill, these guys are like the first responders. When there's a kill out there, when somebody dies out in the woods, magpies are almost always number one on the scene. And they can't poke through the hide of an elk or a deer. They just don't have the beak for it. They can't rip like that. So they need help. So what they do is they go find the nearest wolf or coyote and harass them, fly at them and get the coyote mad enough to chase them. And the coyote will chase them and chase them and chase them, and they keep leading it till they lead it to the kill. And then the coyote says, "Oh, that's what you're trying to tell me," or the wolf does, and they tear into it, and the magpie waits for the open package, and is able to eat. That's a little ruse that they do with their bird brain. Right tool for the job. Most people think that tool making is one of those things that separates the chimpanzees from the reptiles. And tool making is a pretty important, innovative kind of thing to do. The best at that is the Caledonian crow that we found so far. Caledonian crows, look at the size of that brain case. I mean, that guy's a smart guy. This is what they do. If they have to find a worm on the inside, a larva on the inside of a log, and that log, that tunnel has a right angle to it, they can take a wire and bend it to that right angle reach in, put a hook on the end of the wire with their beak and hook that larva and pull it out, making a specific tool for that specific situation is what the Caledonian crow can do. That's bird brain. There are 5 kinds of animals that I know about that have this ability to use 5 or 6 step problems to solve a problem. They start with a tool that they have to make another tool, and that tool helps them make another tool. You see what I'm getting at? Like a 6-step problem. Those animals are porpoises, chimpanzees, ravens, Caledonian crows, and some humans. Those are the 5 that can do that kind of a thought process. And so that doesn't mean that they're smarter than the other birds. You got to get this straight. It doesn't mean that they're smarter than the other birds. They're more like our kind of smart. Does that make sense? They're more like our kind of smart. And there's a big difference there. So these guys, whoops, wrong button. What we don't know. Sometimes I think the mark of intelligence is to know what you don't know. And one of the things we don't know is why crows, when somebody dies, when a crow dies, they come in a big mob, and they all kind of fly around and they hang around. Most scientists now are starting to believe that they're really kind of concerned that a crow died and they want to find out what killed it so that it doesn't happen to them. But if you're a poet or a musician or an artist, you're probably going to think now, they're having a wake or a funeral for that crow. It kind of depends on your perspective. If, I went too far in here. If a raven beats up on another raven in a squabble, and the loser goes away and sulks, the winner, in a very short amount of time, will come over to the loser and preen it and soothe it and try to make it feel better about losing the fight. That's altruism, which is something that's getting more and more rare in our culture. It's about concern about the other. Pretty amazing stuff that they do. I was in grad school at University of Minnesota, and I lived on a beaver pond in the state park, and I had a 3/4 mile long driveway that went along this big long pond, which was actually a river channel. And as I drove out one morning from the cabin toward going to teach classes and as a TA or going to classes as a grad student, and went out to the college, in the middle of the road there was a gull sitting right on the median in this 2-track dirt road, right in the middle. Right out in front in the pond there were about 40 other herring gulls. And they were cawing and circling and yelling and cawing and circling. And I had to get out. I drove right up to this bird, didn't move. I got out and they kind of shooshed it out into the pond, and it flew out into the pond, maybe 15 feet, and landed. And everybody else was squawking like crazy. And I went off to classes. Came back that evening, late afternoon actually. Came back again to the same exact spot, sitting there. Bunch of the other gulls were way out there screaming and yelling. This time I had to literally touch it to shoosh it back out into the pond so I could drive, because I didn't want to run over it. Went and slept and got up the next morning and came out to go to classes again. And when I came out that time, the same bird was right in exactly that same spot, but it was tipped over and it was dead. And all the other gulls were gone. I don't exactly know what happened that day, but I do know that we don't know a lot of things about the world of birds and their brains. And what we can know is limited because we're not them. We are not they and we are not us. And that's the big difference between using our value system to talk about a bird's intelligence. They're not us, and we're not them. The difference, as I see it, between the bird brain And the human brain is really only one thing when you think about it. We try really hard to understand the world and science and things to try to find that out. But the real big difference that I found so far in looking at the two kinds of intelligence, bird brains versus human brains, is that the direction is that the human brain has this thing called ego, where it thinks it knows more than it knows. And birds don't have that problem. They operate in the world of reality. And when they operate in the world of reality, they are saying to us, believe your science and believe the evidence. Believe in reality. Because we've done this pretty successfully for about 100 million years. We've been around here for 1/300th of that time. That's not a very long time. And in that 1/300th of that time, we're making a mess of things. We are warming our climate. We're causing extinctions. We're trying to bend this intricate balance of 8,700,000 species on this planet to our will and to our whims. That's the human brain versus the bird brain. The birds have never done that in 100 million years. We've never done that. We do it on a daily basis. And the raven would say that bird brain, limiting, in between, dodo. When I was in grad school, while I was working on my thesis, I worked on common loons. And common loons were a pretty cool bird, as you probably know. And I would go out, and I've heard this hundreds of times, where a loon will I heard it hundreds of times, and I never got tired of it. And my hair always stood on end when I heard it. It's an amazing sound. And I think some of that is because it's coming not just from their bird brain, but perhaps maybe from their bird heart. They're singing their hearts out. And it also could mean that it doesn't necessarily mean it comes from their heart, but it certainly goes to mine. I'll tell you that. And we have that lesson in front of us all the time that birds can tell us. If you lead when you're trying to learn with your heart, your brain will follow. Bird brains do us well. Thank you very much. But I can't answer. Yes.
So the birds that are able to remember where they put their food and stuff, on average, do they have a bigger hippocampus than some of the other ones?
That can do spatial organization. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if comparative species to species stuff has been done. I would imagine, I know it's got to be more efficient for some reason. That doesn't necessarily mean it's larger. Yes?
Information, a feature of why people hate magpies. My dad told me when he was a boy how many times he went hungry because the magpies would get into the chicken pen and steal the eggs.
Oh, really?
He passed that on to me.
Well, I don't blame him for being mad at him, because it's food we're talking about here. That was good to me. Any other questions? Yes.
Were you in Alaska between 1982 and 1990 as Dr. Lunacy.
I was.
I was there.
Jeez, that's a long time ago. Dr. Lunacy is a Swedish moon expert, don't you know? Yeah.
I remember your program
Yeah.
like it was yesterday.
Oh,
It was
that's cool.
pretty
Thank you.
impressive.
Yeah, I was doing for a few years in a row that they did a giant moon festival up in Alaska, and moon suits me well with my multiple personality disorder. So
Well, and you had a moon costume.
I did. I still do. Yes.
You early on, you talked about the mountain chickadee and the black chickadee. Only mountain chickadee gets bigger brains.
No, the black cat does too.
Oh, they both.
Yeah, they both do. Yeah, I just wanted to get both of them in there equal time. Yeah, they both do. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out.